At 27, my family started pressuring me to get married. I abruptly broke up with my boyfriend of 3 years and returned to my hometown for arranged dates. A friend asked, "You like Lucas so much, can you really let him go?" I scoffed, "I'm not stupid. He's fine for casual dating, but marrying him would be a nightmare." Suddenly, a familiar, gloomy voice came from nearby. "Oh, so that's your reason for dumping me?" 1. Dragging my suitcase home, I bumped into a girl leaving my apartment. A loose black sweater revealed delicate collarbones, no pants look completed with YSL stiletto heels. I recognized her as Luna, the bassist from Lucas's band, a pretty girl in her early 20s. I instinctively hid behind the hallway door. A moment later, Lucas emerged behind her, wearing only jeans, lazily leaning against the wall, lighting a cigarette. His upper body was bare, water droplets still clinging to the beautiful lines of his abs. He casually tossed a Chanel handbag at her. "Here." Luna's eyes lit up, and she threw herself at Lucas, squealing. "Oh, I've wanted this bag for so long. Where did you get it?" "Picked it up in Hong Kong last time I was there." "I really love it, thanks, baby." Luna lingered, but Lucas seemed impatient, frowning slightly. "All right, get going." The girl stepped away, half annoyed, half teasing. "How heartless. You called me baby just now, and now you're kicking me out." Undeterred, she blew Lucas a kiss, happily slinging the bag over her shoulder. "Bye, see you tomorrow." After she left, I emerged from behind the door. Lucas seemed surprised to see me, but quickly regained his composure. "Why didn't you tell me you were coming home?" I looked at him for a moment. "It was late, I didn't want to disturb your rest." The fresh, intimate marks on Lucas's neck were obvious, but he showed no guilt, casually pulling me into the apartment. "I'm hungry, make something to eat." He sat on the sofa, turning on the TV as if nothing had happened. Seeing I hadn't moved, he frowned. "What's wrong?" Then, as if realizing something, a lazy smile spread across his face. "Missing me?" He got up, embracing me from behind, his warm breath tickling my neck, his hand slowly slipping under my shirt. "I'll eat you first, then dinner." His fingers, calloused from years of playing guitar, grazed my skin with a rough, ticklish sensation. I closed my eyes, feeling tired and annoyed by the encounter with the girl. I liked Lucas's body. I initially pursued him because of his good looks. But perhaps it was the long flight, or the image of that girl, but all I felt was fatigue, no desire. Lucas rarely faced rejection from me, and his expression darkened. "What's wrong?" I looked down and saw a black crumpled mess on the rug. A pair of ripped stockings. Lucas clearly saw them too. He clicked his tongue, his expression turning ugly. An awkward silence filled the living room as he pulled a cigarette from the pack, the sound of the mint capsule bursting as he crushed it. Her lease was up, and she had nowhere to stay, so I let her stay one night. Nothing happened between us. I looked at Lucas, the white smoke separating our gazes, obscuring our expressions. But we both knew how lame the excuse sounded. This wasn't the first time Lucas had cheated. He was a natural-born playboy. I knew that from the first time I met him. My friend had wanted to take me to see a famous rock band, saying the lead singer was incredibly hot, but tickets were hard to get. I wasn't interested in rock music and was hesitant. Until Lucas took the stage. He lowered his head, strumming his guitar. His black hair, without gel, casually brushed his fair forehead, occasionally revealing a hint of pink eyelids. He was the most ordinary one on stage, dressed in a simple black t-shirt and jeans, yet he instantly became the center of attention. His face was the most expensive luxury. He looked up, the stage lights reflecting in his amber eyes, a faint smile playing on his lips. It was my first time at a band performance. My friend and the girls below the stage went wild, their screams almost piercing the roof. Our eyes met for a moment, and then he looked away. The music that night was great, but I couldn't hear a thing. Because at that moment, the world went silent, and I could only hear the thunder of my own heart. After the show, countless girls rushed backstage to ask for his contact information, and I was one of them. After being single for 23 years, it was probably the bravest thing I'd ever done. Lucas didn't turn anyone away, and the girls who asked for his WeChat, including me, all scanned the QR code. A year later, all the moths drawn to him had given up, but I persevered. Whether out of pity, gratitude, or something else, Lucas accepted my relationship, and I became his girlfriend, until now. But I knew that in these few years together, Lucas had never truly loved me. Or perhaps he did love me, appreciating my understanding, generosity, and lack of jealousy. He had been caught cheating many times, but each time, he gave me a passable excuse, and I forgave him. He had often said that I wasn't his type, and that he was only with me because I was good to him. He had also joked that he would dump me when he found his true love. The only reason our relationship had lasted this long was because of my own sacrifices. You promised me you wouldn't cheat again. My voice was soft as I looked at the tattered Balenciaga stockings on the floor. A hint of sarcasm flashed in Lucas's eyes. He didn't seem inclined to placate me. You believed me when I was joking? He smirked, leaning closer, blowing the mint-flavored smoke into my face, his expression entirely malicious. Can't handle it? If you can't handle it, you can break up with me. He had said these words to me countless times before. Each time, I ended up begging him not to leave. Over time, he learned how to manipulate me. He knew that when he said those words, I would be helpless. I turned my head. I'm tired, I'm going to rest. Lucas grabbed my wrist. His brow bone was high, and he always exuded a kind of oppressive pressure when he was expressionless. Naomi, that's enough. I shook off his hand and went into the room. Soon after, a loud slamming door echoed from outside. Lucas left. He was angry, I knew. After all, I was always the one coaxing him, catering to him. I had never given him such a cold shoulder like this before. I turned over and opened my phone. In the family group chat, my mom sent me a message. Mom has never pushed you before, but you're 27 this year. It's time to think about marriage, right? Mom's colleague's son is a good match. I think he's good looking too. Why don't you come back and meet him during this holiday? Then, I opened my boss's WeChat. Naomi, the branch office is short of people right now. With your ability, it's a waste for you to be just a deputy manager. Are you interested in becoming a manager at the branch office? It'll be tough at first to develop the business, but it's up to you. My mom wanted me to go home for a blind date. The company had just opened a branch in my hometown. With the time, location, and people on my side, it seemed like I had no reason to stay here. I sighed. Actually, I really liked Lucas. He was handsome, had a great body, and we were sexually compatible. Most importantly, he was a scumbag. It was easy to be with him because I didn't have to think about being responsible for him or consider our future. When I first started working, I was exhausted and wanted to relieve the pressure, but I wasn't that attractive and was a die-hard face connoisseur. After searching for a while, I couldn't find anyone suitable until I met Lucas. He spent his best years with me, relieving a lot of stress with his body while I was working hard for my career. And although his relationships with women were unclear, he was careful about that. Before being with him, I heard that he required women to provide a physical examination certificate within 3 days. I always took precautions, so I wasn't afraid of getting sick. It would be difficult to find such a pleasing man again. But there was nothing I could do. Dating was one thing, getting married and settling down was another. I liked Lucas. But I also knew he wasn't a good match. Now, it was time for me to make a decision. 2. Lucas didn't come home that night. In the days that followed, he didn't appear before me. He didn't answer my messages or calls. After sending more, there was only a red exclamation mark. He had blocked me, a practiced act of cold violence. There had been times like this before. Lucas was best at the Cold War. Each time, I had to humble myself and coax him for a long time before he would give me a good look. But this time, I was busy with the handover and didn't have time to coax him. I was buying a ticket back to my hometown when my phone suddenly rang. It was a friend of Lucas's. The other side of the phone was noisy, filled with the laughter of men and women. The music was so loud that it made me feel restless, even through the phone. Naomi, Lucas is drunk. Can you come pick him up? Lucas loved going to bars. His family was rich, and the band was just a hobby. He didn't rely on it to make money. I once asked him why he didn't inherit the family business. He sneered and said that his father's illegitimate children were fighting like dogs over his family's money. He didn't want to compete for those scraps. Anyway, his grandfather's and mother's property would be left to him. He wasn't short of money and would just do what he liked in this life. Lucas seemed to have no ambition, and we had nothing in common in this regard. Every time I landed a project or got promoted at work, he always seemed uninterested. He once disdainfully said that it was pointless to work so hard for that little bit of money each month, which wasn't even enough for him to spend on drinks at the bar in one night. I knew that we weren't the same kind of people at heart. Apart from physical compatibility, we had nothing in common. I didn't care about his soul, I just liked his body. He ignored my inner self, but was used to my understanding. It was good that way, so that we wouldn't be sad when we separated. I thought about it and said okay. I put down the phone and looked out the window. The city at night seemed more splendid than during the day. Thousands of lights, cars, and horses intersected, obscuring the light of all the stars in the sky. I looked at the ticket, 8 a.m. the day after tomorrow. I sighed. Actually, I didn't want to break up so soon. Lucas and I were really compatible in bed. I was under a lot of pressure from changing jobs these days, and I wanted to have a final fling with him. I clicked my tongue, feeling a little regretful, but since the opportunity had come, there was nothing I could do. When I got to the bar, Lucas was surrounded by a group of girls. They were all kinds of shapes and sizes, but the common feature was that they were all very pretty. The heavy makeup couldn't hide the ample collagen on their faces. They were all young. No wonder girls liked him. Lucas's family was rich, he spent lavishly, and he was handsome. His philandering seemed to have become an attribute that added to his charm. I touched my face and remembered what Lucas had said before. "You're 27, you should get a facial, take care of yourself, okay?" No wonder he didn't like me, he was surrounded by girls in their early 20s. I didn't say anything, standing outside the crowd, meeting Lucas's eyes. But he didn't seem to see me and quickly looked away. Luna, her face flushed, clung tightly to him, her voice sticky. "Lucas, have another drink." Lucas smiled. Under the lights, his eyes slanted upward, extremely beautiful, but without a trace of warmth. "It's no fun drinking like that, why don't you feed me?" "How do I feed you?" Lucas didn't answer, just looked down at her. Half a second later, Luna understood. A hint of surprise flashed in her eyes, and she tilted her head back and drank the caramel-colored whiskey in her glass. Then Lucas suddenly hooked her chin and kissed her hard. His kiss was without tenderness, seemingly venting his emotions. Luna tilted her head back to endure it, her eyes gradually becoming moist due to lack of oxygen. The liquid from their lips spilled, reflecting the hazy colors under the lights, drawing a long, shimmering thread as they finally separated. The atmosphere exploded, everyone screaming and hollering. I knew he was doing it on purpose. He was punishing me. Punishing me for giving him the cold shoulder the other day and not appeasing him afterward. It wasn't until I walked in front of Lucas that everyone noticed me and gradually quieted down. Lucas looked up, his expression indifferent. "What are you doing here?" Looking at his face, I vaguely recalled the days of intimate whispers. When the passion was intense, we had spoken of love. Did it hurt? Maybe a little. But it didn't seem to hurt too much. After all, I had always known what kind of person Lucas was. A philanderer, endlessly seeking excitement, unable to refuse. Selfish, probably spoiled from a young age, always self-centered, never considering the feelings of others. I said in a trembling voice, "Lucas, you're going too far." Lucas looked up at me. Although he was sitting and I was standing, I felt like he was looking down on me. He still had that indifferent expression, with a scornful smile. "Too far? You can break up, no one's stopping you." I didn't say a word, just looked at him. I couldn't count how many times he had threatened me with a breakup. 50 times? Or 100? A friend, feeling he had gone too far since everyone knew how I treated him, whispered to him, "Lucas, don't be angry with your girl. Look, she's about to cry." In fact, I was crying. To make the performance complete, when the tear fell to the ground, I clearly saw Lucas's expression change. His fingers holding the cigarette twitched, but he didn't say anything, just looked at me coldly. The next second, I said softly, "Okay, Lucas. Let's break up then." Lucas's expression instantly turned ugly. For a moment, I almost thought he was going to explode. But instead of getting angry, he laughed, but the laugh seemed to be through gritted teeth. "Impressive, Naomi. Fine, but I never go back on my word. Don't come crawling back to me like a dog." "Okay." I nodded, wiping away the tears from the corner of my eyes. Then I turned around and left, without looking back at him. Lucas didn't come home that night. I deleted Lucas's contact information and everything about him overnight, and packed my luggage. The next morning, I boarded the earliest flight back to my hometown. As the plane flew over the clouds, I pulled out the SIM card and threw it into the trash bag. 3. I didn't contact Lucas again. After posting a few late-night emo captions on my social media, creating a persona of an injured woman, I simply forgot about him. Life back in my hometown went smoothly. I quickly adapted to the new company's business and met the men arranged by my parents. The 28-year-old programmer, already showing signs of balding, was still babbling on. "I think women should focus on the family after marriage. I mean, you shouldn't work after marriage, don't be so career-minded, take care of the family, every successful man should have a woman behind him." He kept talking, and I smiled at the coffee cup in my hand, thinking I had to resist the urge to dump it on this dead pig's head. After he finally finished speaking, he glanced at me. "Did you hear what I said clearly? Do you have anything to add?" I maintained my smile. "No, but Mr. Wong, I don't think we're a good fit. Let's not contact each other anymore." Then, I turned around and left while he kept mumbling things like, "Women over 25 are worthless, what are you being picky about, old women?" I'd been back in my hometown for so many days, and my mom had introduced me to many potential partners. There were indeed some good ones. But after having experienced such an exceptional man like Lucas, I really couldn't accept these average guys. This feeling continued until a meeting at work. Everyone arrived early, silently surrounding the conference table, the atmosphere serious. I quietly asked the vice president next to me, "What's going on? Is something wrong with the company?" The vice president leaned close to my ear. "The old chairman's son is coming in from above. It said he's starting with our branch as practice before taking over the entire group. This young Mr. Quinn is said to be from Harvard. He worked at Goldman Sachs for a few years after graduating, and then went out on his own and made billions overnight. If the old chairman hadn't been coercing and enticing him all these years, he wouldn't have come back. He's a real ruthless one. Be careful when talking to him." Soon after, a young man in a black suit walked in. He wore a black wool coat, and as he entered the office, someone respectfully took his coat. The sound of his leather shoes stopped. I looked up. It wasn't just me, everyone's attention was instantly drawn to him. The first thing that struck me was the man's aura. It was an aura of someone who had been in a high position for a long time, used to being in control. He didn't have an arrogant expression, but everyone present, including me, felt like they couldn't help but look down and avoid eye contact with him. The second thing I noticed were his clear eyes. His black hair was combed back with hair gel, revealing his handsome brow bone. I had heard that the chairman's wife was French, and the elegance of blonde hair and blue eyes and the charm of Eastern aesthetics were perfectly combined in him. A typical Western bone structure with Eastern features. This man was good-looking, on par with Lucas, but his aura was so strong that people didn't notice his appearance at first glance. "Sorry, the plane was delayed, so I'm late." He first admitted his mistake, then sat at the head of the table and got straight to the point. "My name is Quinn, and I will be the general manager of the company from now on. I have already reviewed the company's basic information and financial statements. Now, starting with the vice president, everyone will give me a basic report on their work achievements over the past year and the work they are currently handling." The heads of departments began to report nervously. As rumored, young Mr. Quinn was an elite, pointing out every attempt to deceive him. I don't like vague statements, and I don't like being deceived. I hope to communicate well with everyone, but if my communication is ineffective, I will consider other methods. He didn't scold or hit anyone, but everyone felt a cold sweat on their backs. Even my palms were damp when I stood up, but luckily, I was well prepared, and my work achievements from the past year were quite good. The more I spoke, the more eloquent I became. Education and career were my pride and the most important things in my life. I never deceived myself in these areas. Young Mr. Quinn didn't interrupt me, and I saw a hint of appreciation in his eyes. After a moment, I stopped, indicating that I was finished. He nodded. "Naomi, right? Not bad. From now on, all reports should be up to this standard." Since young Mr. Quinn arrived, everyone's work became busier. He eliminated many redundant tasks and bad assets, and also negotiated many high-quality projects. Everyone worked longer hours, but their salaries also increased accordingly. The colleagues, especially the young female colleagues, were very interested in young Mr. Quinn. Two new girls seemed to have taken the wrong medicine and started to act like the sweet, innocent girl falling in love with the domineering CEO from novels. One openly argued with him at a meeting, and the other spilled coffee on his $3,000 shirt and tried to wipe it off with her hand. The first one was fired the next day. The second one was fired that same day. The female colleagues became honest, but they still gathered in the pantry during breaks to discuss his gossip. "I heard he's never had a girlfriend before. Could he still be a virgin? No way. You watch too many dramas. How could a man with his conditions still be a virgin? So many women are staring at him. Let me sleep with him for one night. I'm willing to spend a year's worth of bonuses. He's just too perfect. Did you see him in dress pants the other day? Oh my God, so hot." Listening from the side, I suddenly became interested. Without Lucas, this Quinn seemed like a better choice. I wanted to try with this man. 4. I started appearing in front of Quinn regularly. He came to work half an hour early every day. 3 out of 5 days a week, I managed to catch the same elevator as him. Usually, it was just the two of us in the elevator at that time. I didn't say much, just greeted him, pressed the elevator button for him, and stood quietly to the side. Then, unfailingly, I would go to get a cup of coffee every day at noon. He usually came for coffee at that time too. I made sure not to run into him in the pantry, leaving before he finished, but making sure he could see me. Occasionally, I would work overtime, and he would pass by my desk on his way home. In short, I tried to appear in front of him as much as possible, but never said more than a word to him. Finally, on the 17th time he saw me working overtime, he paused and walked towards me. "I've been seeing you working overtime a lot lately. Are you having any problems?" I looked up as if surprised, hesitated for a moment, and handed over the document I was holding. "I recently took over a new project, but I'm not sure about the risks of some of the company's assets, so I have to study them more." Quinn naturally sat down in the seat next to me. "Let me take a look." He had a faint woody scent, which mixed with my light rose fragrance, creating an indescribable intoxicating feeling. I think this project is feasible. Look at the company's 2023 report. Their financial situation is pretty good, and... He spoke eloquently, and I nodded attentively, occasionally asking some highly professional questions. After he answered each one, I showed a look of realization. I see. Thank you, Mr. Quinn. I had never thought about it in that direction before. Your professional skills are already good, but you just lack some work experience. Don't put too much pressure on yourself. Go home early. He made a rare joke. Don't let people think I'm some heartless exploiter who forces employees to work overtime all the time. I nodded, put away the documents, and went downstairs with him. As we went out, raindrops were blown onto me by the wind, and I hesitated, taking a step back. Quinn was about to leave, but when he saw I hadn't moved, he turned back and asked, "What's wrong?" I waved my hand. "It's nothing, Mr. Quinn. You go first." I remembered I have something to do. He didn't ask much, nodded, and left. 5 minutes later, his car drove out of the underground parking lot, and I was still standing at the company entrance. Quinn lowered the car window. "You didn't drive, did you?" I said sheepishly, "Yes, it's hard to get a taxi in the rain." "It's okay, Mr. Quinn. I'll wait a little longer and there should be one." He said. "Get in. I'll give you a ride." On the way, I talked to Quinn a lot. He was surprised to find that we had similar interests. Even the obscure movie I liked, The Holy Mountain, was his favorite. Quinn gradually became more talkative, and when we arrived at my house, he didn't step on the brakes and kept driving. I pursed my lips and was about to remind him, but he had already noticed. "Sorry, I didn't look at the navigation." After the car stopped, I again expressed my gratitude for him giving me a ride home. Quinn just nodded, his lips parted slightly as if he wanted to say something, but he swallowed it back. "What's wrong, Mr. Quinn?" I looked at him. "What's the perfume you're wearing? It smells nice." He seemed to regret saying it, but at this point, saying anything else would only make it more awkward, so he simply lowered his head and didn't speak. I smiled inwardly. Penhaligon's the fox. "Well, Mr. Quinn, see you tomorrow." 5. I stood behind the curtains watching Quinn leave, then picked up a notebook from the side table. To seize this opportunity, I hadn't driven to work in a long time. Fortunately, the weather forecast was accurate today, allowing me to encounter such a rain. I opened the notebook, which was full of records of Quinn's preferences. There was very little information about him. I finally found a social media account he used when he was in school, carefully recording every word, which gave me some insight into his preferences. Even that movie, The Holy Mountain, I only watched last night. There was no choice, an ordinary woman like me had to put in some extra effort to win over such an exceptional man. I curled my lips, sat on the bed, and was about to rest when my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but when I answered, it was a familiar voice. Lucas's tone was lukewarm. "You left a lot of your things at the apartment. Come and get them. Or I'll throw them all away." When I left, I did leave some things behind, but they were all things I didn't need and took up space. I thought Lucas would throw them away directly, given his personality. I didn't expect him to call and notify me. Then throw them all away. "I don't want them," I said, flipping through my notes on how to win over Quinn, my tone somewhat perfunctory. Lucas was clearly unhappy on the other end of the phone. After a long silence, he hung up directly. He was always like this, moody, always needing someone to appease him. But now, I had no obligation to appease him anymore. After blacklisting the number, I threw the matter to the back of my mind. I had already spent time with Quinn yesterday, so I couldn't use the same approach again today. I left work early, which was rare for me, and went to a bar with a friend to have a few drinks. After a few rounds, we were both a little tipsy. My friend squinted at me and asked, "You liked Lucas so much before. Now that you've suddenly broken up, can you really let him go?" When I was with Lucas, my friends always disapproved of me, thinking I was too much of a simp and had no self-respect. But I didn't think there was anything wrong with it. Since I wanted Lucas's body, I had to give something in return. Besides, whether I simp or not was my decision. How was that lacking in self-respect? I put down my glass. He's only good for dating. I'm not stupid. It's fine to play around when you're young. If I really married him, I'd be miserable for the rest of my life. My friend gave me a thumbs up. "Awesome. You're really on another level. You're right. You got to play with Lucas at his best. So you're the one in the atmosphere." She suddenly stopped talking, looking at me behind me in horror. Am I hallucinating from drinking too much? A soft laugh came from behind, carrying a chill that instantly sobered me up. "Oh? So that's your reason for dumping me?" I turned around stiffly. Lucas, wearing a silk white shirt, was leaning against the wall, looking at me coldly. My friend ditched me without any loyalty. Lucas grabbed me and pulled me into an empty hallway, looking down at me. I seriously suspected he was going to kill me the next second. Why did you come? I asked preemptively. You didn't come here specifically to find me, did you? Lucas lazily tugged at the corners of his mouth. Naomi, if you don't have a mirror at home, you should at least have a toilet, right? I came here with the band for a performance, but if I hadn't run into you by chance, I wouldn't have known that I let you play with me for nothing all these years. I was just joking with my friend. You know, you hurt me too deeply, and I'm a person who cares about face. I turned my head away from Lucas, but he grabbed my chin and forcefully turned it back. He said through gritted teeth, Naomi, have you always thought of me as an idiot? Yes, I silently answered in my heart, forcibly freeing my sore chin from his hand, maintaining a calm demeanor. Lucas, no matter what, I've been devoted to you these past few years. You can touch your conscience and say, how have I treated you? I haven't done anything to wrong you. On the contrary, you've been wronging me all along. Even if I really played you, it wouldn't be for nothing. Doesn't my youth count as youth too? Since we've come to this point, let's part ways amicably, at least. I paused, unable to say the word love. At least we shared something. Lucas looked at me for a long time. Just when I thought he was going to get angry again, he suddenly smiled. Under the lights, his face was as beautiful as ever, but I was no longer moved. I had seen such a beautiful person for more than 1,000 days and nights, and I was tired of it. Naomi, you think too highly of yourself. Lucas curled his lips. Of course, we'll part ways amicably. Did you think I would pester you? Just remember, you didn't dump me, I, Lucas, dumped you. Saying that, he turned around and left, as if there was something dirty behind him. I sighed silently, watching his back. Lucas had never been dumped in his life. Being dumped by me probably made him very frustrated. But if thinking that way could make him feel better, I didn't care. 6. I maintained my usual frequency of working overtime, and Quinn left later and later each day. Occasionally, he would give me a ride. The weather in late autumn and early winter was dry and cold. People wrapped in coats walked under the lights of the traffic, the coldness seeming to distance everyone, making them involuntarily want to get closer together. We would talk about the company's projects, share what we had been doing recently, and I would complain to him about the people at the collaborating company. Occasionally, he would agree with me. Yeah, I think that person is really stupid too. Then we would laugh together. Over time, I could feel his affection for me growing little by little, so on the day of the first snow, I decided to administer a strong dose. I asked him for leave, and when he asked me why, I answered hesitantly. Something came up at home. Logically, he shouldn't have asked any further at this point, but Quinn frowned. Did something happen to your family? Is there anything I can help with? I smiled awkwardly. No, it's my mom forcing me to go home for a blind date. Quinn was stunned. I rarely saw that expression on his face. I added, I'm 27 now, and my family has been urging me a lot. I pushed them off before, but I can't this time. After a long time, Quinn lowered his head. Okay, but you know the company is busy these days. I can only approve you. He looked at his watch as if putting on an act. 2 hours. I think that's enough for a blind date. Okay, there's 1 hour and 59 minutes left now. I wasn't lying to Quinn. I really was going on a blind date. Recent blind dates hadn't been going well, and my mom was going crazy. Luckily, the quality of this blind date was good. He had returned from overseas, worked at a big company, was 5 feet 11 inches, had a gentle appearance, and spoke respectfully to women, with no patronizing remarks. I was interested and couldn't help but chat a little more. Halfway through, my blind date went to the restroom. I lowered my head and played with my phone, feeling someone sit down in front of me. I was about to speak but stopped. Sitting in front of me was none other than Lucas. He was almost 6 feet 3 inches, so the sofa that was just right for my blind date was a bit cramped for him. His long legs had nowhere to rest, so he could only lean back on the sofa as much as possible. Lucas played with the Volkswagen car key that my blind date had left on the table, scoffing. You broke up with me just to come back and go on blind dates with this kind of trash? The smile faded from my face. Didn't you say you came with the band for a performance? Why haven't you left yet? The band's schedule changed. Do you think I want to stay in this godforsaken place? I said seriously, I hope you can respect my blind date. He's a good person. Please leave now and don't disturb my blind date. Lucas's face suddenly darkened, and the smile on his lips disappeared. My blind date returned, looking confused at the scene. Excuse me, who are you? Lucas didn't even look at him, his pressure was low. I'm her boyfriend. If you know what's good for you, get out of here. I quickly explained, no, he's not. But Lucas stood up and grabbed my wrist. What? Do we have to kiss here for you to believe me? By the time I freed myself from his grasp, my blind date had already left, his face full of anger. I was furious. Lucas, what's wrong with you? We've already broken up. Lucas leaned back on the sofa, the smile on his lips looking as if it needed to be punched. That was a unilateral decision from you. I didn't agree to it. Dating isn't marriage. Why would it need both parties to agree? And you clearly said before that you would never go back on your word. I changed my mind, Lucas said as easily as if he were deciding what to eat today, without any psychological burden. I think you're pretty good at taking care of people. I'm comfortable with you taking care of me, and I don't want to break up anymore. People really do laugh when they're speechless. I tugged at the corners of my mouth. But I'm not comfortable. I wasted your best years, what's uncomfortable? He raised his voice, attracting the attention of everyone else. I wanted to find a hole to crawl into, leaning forward to cover his mouth. Shut up? Lucas grabbed my hand, and I watched him show a malicious smile. You haven't met any good men since you broke up with me, have you? Naomi, you know in your heart that I'm the best man you can meet. And we're very compatible in bed. Rather than being with those trash, we might as well. His words stopped abruptly, because a hand pulled me away. I looked up. Quinn was still wearing the black suit he had worn at the company, his brows tightly furrowed. Didn't you say you came for a blind date? Why are you getting physical? Is he harassing you? I was completely dumbfounded. My original plan was to make Quinn jealous, but Quinn didn't come. Instead, Lucas showed up. Just when Lucas was acting crazy, Quinn came. I'm her boyfriend. Who are you to meddle in other people's business? Lucas stood up unhappily, two tall men facing each other. I'm Naomi's boss, Quinn said calmly. As far as I know, Naomi doesn't have a boyfriend. Does she need to report to you whether she has a boyfriend? Lucas looked back at me, smiling mockingly. Oh, no wonder you broke up with me so readily. This is the new man you've been eyeing recently. Naomi, does he know what a despicable person you are? Are you planning to use the same tricks you used on me to deal with him? Even though I had always been emotionally stable, I was so angry at this point that I almost choked. I was about to yell back at him when Quinn spoke up. So you're the ex who got dumped. Since Naomi dumped you, it means she doesn't like you. There's no point in clinging on. Lucas's face darkened. He looked at me. The time you were given for leave is up. The company has a meeting waiting for you. Let's go. I didn't care about anything else, frowning at Lucas. I don't know what's wrong with you, but Lucas, in all these years together, what do I owe you? It was your will as well, I never forced you. I'll say it again, I hope we can part ways amicably. Please don't bother me again in the future. Lucas wanted to say something, but after hearing my words, his eyes darkened, and he didn't say anything else. I was dragged away by Quinn. Was that really your ex-boyfriend? Sitting in the car, Quinn rested his arms on the steering wheel, his tone heavy. Didn't you say you had to go back to the company for a meeting? Was that person your ex-boyfriend? He repeated. Yes, I rubbed my face, forcing a smile. We were together for 3 years. I liked him a lot before, but he cheated on me time and time again. I couldn't take it anymore. Including this time coming back to my hometown, it was because I broke up with him. I was too hurt. Originally, being with you these days, I glanced at Quinn's expression, feeling low. Originally, I was feeling a lot better, but I didn't expect him to come back and pester me. Quinn looked at me. He's not worthy of you. Don't be soft-hearted. Cheating only happens once or 100 times. If he's unfaithful to you, it means he can't overcome his animal instincts, he hasn't evolved well. He's a person without any self-control and doesn't love you enough. You should find a responsible man. I couldn't help but smile, but I forced it down, saying sadly, but there are too few good men like you. Where am I supposed to find such a man? Quinn's ears slowly turned red, and he coughed. Well, only I can be worthy of you. 7. 3 days later, Quinn sent me a message while I was drinking at a bar, asking when I was going back to work. I was really stunned when he said those almost confessing words that day. I didn't expect him to be so direct. But I didn't say anything. I was serious about Quinn. After these days of getting to know him, he really exceeded my standards in every way. So we couldn't be together in a muddle-headed way. Like I was with Lucas. A muddled start always has a muddled ending. Coincidentally, using the excuse of a broken heart, I took my annual leave and came out with friends to relax. This bar was one of the most upscale in the city, not too noisy, and the band played really nice songs. I was admiring the figures of handsome men and beautiful women on the dance floor while drinking with my friends, until the music stopped at some point. After a while, the guitar sound started again. I found a love for me. Darling, just dive right in and follow my lead. 亲爱的，就跟着我坠入爱河. Well, I found a girl, beautiful and sweet. 我寻得这么一个女孩，漂亮甜美. Oh, I never knew you were the someone waiting for me.
我从没想过你就是那个为我等候着的人。
'Cause we were just kids when we fell in love.
当我们各自坠入爱河时，都还是个孩子。
Not knowing what it was.
当时不懂得爱。
I will not give you up this time.
但这一次，我不会再让爱逝去。
A magnetic, slightly hoarse voice rang out, and I stopped drinking, widening my eyes to look at the stage. Lucas, wearing a black shirt, was sitting on a high stool strumming a guitar. A silver chain glittered around his neck. In an instant, the noisy crowd and the blurred lights disappeared. I could only see the faint light in his eyes as he met my gaze. The girls below were going wild, all discussing going to ask for his WeChat later. Everything was like the scene when we first met. Except this time, it wasn't me walking towards him. Lucas held the guitar in one hand and slowly walked down from the stage, smiling at me. Add me on WeChat? The whole place erupted in cheers. I had always thought my heart was as calm as still water, but it actually stirred a bit. I looked at Lucas with a complex expression. What's the point? Not that I was putting myself down, but I could tell that Lucas really did like me. But how much of his liking was based on me as a person? Or was it just because when we were together, I took care of him meticulously, and I was understanding enough to never argue with him when he cheated? I felt that perhaps everything he was doing now was because, in his subconscious, I had always been the weaker party, and he had complete control over our relationship. Now he couldn't accept that he had been dumped by me, the simp. The crowd slowly dispersed. Lucas greeted the stage, the music continued, and he sat next to me, leaning back on the sofa, sighing. I went back and thought about what you said that day, and that's really how it is. You've never wronged me in all these years together. You've given a lot to me, and I've been hurting you all along. I can understand why you want to leave me. His expression was a bit stagnant, as if there were some things he didn't want to say but had to, carrying a rough unfamiliarity. If I change in the future, I'll be good to you, and I won't be out of line with other women again, can you? As if remembering that he said he would never go back on his word, his face turned red, and he looked determined. Can you get back together with me? I'm sorry, I was bad before. I looked at Lucas in surprise, wondering if he had been possessed. Lucas, who always looked down on me from above, was actually apologizing and actively trying to reconcile. Who gave you this idea? I knew this was definitely not his style, someone must have given him ideas from behind. Lucas pursed his lips. My brothers. After you broke up with me, they all said that I usually went too far and that if I wanted to get my wife back, I couldn't be too proud. Saying this, his shame seemed to have reached its limit. So do you want to get back together with me? I'm in better shape than those blind dates of yours. You've dated me before, so you'll find them annoying, and that boss of yours the other day, he seems like a boring elite who will only talk about work with you every day. We've been together for 3 years. We're the most compatible. I answered irrelevantly, how did you get the boss to agree to this? Lucas curled his lips. I bought his store. I'm the owner of this store now. Do you like this store? I'll give it to you if you like it. No, thanks. I drank the last sip of wine in my glass, picked up my bag, and stood up. Thank you for your kindness, the song was good, but I'm not getting back together with you. The air solidified. Lucas pursed his lips, looking at me expressionlessly. Why? Lucas had a pair of beautiful peach blossom eyes. Even when he was unhappy, those eyes were always bright and full of color. It was rare to see him so cold. Because, I smiled, I never go back on my word. 8. To get rid of Lucas's entanglement, I volunteered to take a business trip for a week. The project was almost finalized. During dinner that night, one of the high-level employees of the other company looked at me in a way that always made me uncomfortable. Little Joe, how old are you this year? The bald, pot-bellied middle-aged man kept asking me. I suppressed my annoyance. 27. Still single? Have you been too busy with your career? He smiled and moved closer to me, trying to read my palm. I brushed it off. I had met a lot of people like this before, thinking that young girls would put up with insults for the sake of cooperation on a project, taking the opportunity to take advantage. I was annoyed, but this cooperation project wasn't small, so I could only endure it. My phone rang, it was a call from Quinn. Are you eating? He heard the noisy voices of men on this side. Why is it so noisy? I sent a message to your boss. If you're full, just leave. I didn't want to stay any longer, but I didn't expect this person to have such a bad temper when drunk. After drinking a few bottles of wine, he started acting crazy, insisting on talking to me. It's good for young girls to be ambitious, but sometimes, just working hard isn't enough. There are many shortcuts in this world. My company has a few projects, let's go to my room and talk about it later. He handed me the room card. I held my breath, suffocated by the smell of alcohol, and pushed the room card back. Mr. Zhang, I'm just a participant in the project. You can talk to our leader. Unexpectedly, he became furious and suddenly pulled me up. A department manager, what are you so proud of? A woman being a manager, didn't you sleep your way up? You're trying to act like a virgin after being a whore? Do you think my position isn't high enough? You damn bitch, you actually dare to look down on me. Well, I found a girl, beautiful and sweet.
我寻得这么一个女孩，漂亮甜美。
Oh, I never knew you were the someone waiting for me.
我从没想过你就是那个为我等候着的人。
'Cause we were just kids when we fell in love.
当我们各自坠入爱河时，都还是个孩子。
Not knowing what it was.
当时不懂得爱。
I will not give you up this time.
但这一次，我不会再让爱逝去。
A magnetic, slightly hoarse voice rang out, and I stopped drinking, widening my eyes to look at the stage. Lucas, wearing a black shirt, was sitting on a high stool strumming a guitar. A silver chain glittered around his neck. In an instant, the noisy crowd and the blurred lights disappeared. I could only see the faint light in his eyes as he met my gaze. The girls below were going wild, all discussing going to ask for his WeChat later. Everything was like the scene when we first met. Except this time, it wasn't me walking towards him. Lucas held the guitar in one hand and slowly walked down from the stage, smiling at me. Add me on WeChat? The whole place erupted in cheers. I had always thought my heart was as calm as still water, but it actually stirred a bit. I looked at Lucas with a complex expression. What's the point? Not that I was putting myself down, but I could tell that Lucas really did like me. But how much of his liking was based on me as a person? Or was it just because when we were together, I took care of him meticulously, and I was understanding enough to never argue with him when he cheated? I felt that perhaps everything he was doing now was because, in his subconscious, I had always been the weaker party, and he had complete control over our relationship. Now he couldn't accept that he had been dumped by me, the simp. The crowd slowly dispersed. Lucas greeted the stage, the music continued, and he sat next to me, leaning back on the sofa, sighing. I went back and thought about what you said that day, and that's really how it is. You've never wronged me in all these years together. You've given a lot to me, and I've been hurting you all along. I can understand why you want to leave me. His expression was a bit stagnant, as if there were some things he didn't want to say but had to, carrying a rough unfamiliarity. If I change in the future, I'll be good to you, and I won't be out of line with other women again, can you? As if remembering that he said he would never go back on his word, his face turned red, and he looked determined. Can you get back together with me? I'm sorry, I was bad before. I looked at Lucas in surprise, wondering if he had been possessed. Lucas, who always looked down on me from above, was actually apologizing and actively trying to reconcile. Who gave you this idea? I knew this was definitely not his style, someone must have given him ideas from behind. Lucas pursed his lips. My brothers. After you broke up with me, they all said that I usually went too far and that if I wanted to get my wife back, I couldn't be too proud. Saying this, his shame seemed to have reached its limit. So do you want to get back together with me? I'm in better shape than those blind dates of yours. You've dated me before, so you'll find them annoying, and that boss of yours the other day, he seems like a boring elite who will only talk about work with you every day. We've been together for 3 years. We're the most compatible. I answered irrelevantly, how did you get the boss to agree to this? Lucas curled his lips. I bought his store. I'm the owner of this store now. Do you like this store? I'll give it to you if you like it. No, thanks. I drank the last sip of wine in my glass, picked up my bag, and stood up. Thank you for your kindness, the song was good, but I'm not getting back together with you. The air solidified. Lucas pursed his lips, looking at me expressionlessly. Why? Lucas had a pair of beautiful peach blossom eyes. Even when he was unhappy, those eyes were always bright and full of color. It was rare to see him so cold. Because, I smiled, I never go back on my word. 8. To get rid of Lucas's entanglement, I volunteered to take a business trip for a week. The project was almost finalized. During dinner that night, one of the high-level employees of the other company looked at me in a way that always made me uncomfortable. Little Joe, how old are you this year? The bald, pot-bellied middle-aged man kept asking me. I suppressed my annoyance. 27. Still single? Have you been too busy with your career? He smiled and moved closer to me, trying to read my palm. I brushed it off. I had met a lot of people like this before, thinking that young girls would put up with insults for the sake of cooperation on a project, taking the opportunity to take advantage. I was annoyed, but this cooperation project wasn't small, so I could only endure it. My phone rang, it was a call from Quinn. Are you eating? He heard the noisy voices of men on this side. Why is it so noisy? I sent a message to your boss. If you're full, just leave. I didn't want to stay any longer, but I didn't expect this person to have such a bad temper when drunk. After drinking a few bottles of wine, he started acting crazy, insisting on talking to me. It's good for young girls to be ambitious, but sometimes, just working hard isn't enough. There are many shortcuts in this world. My company has a few projects, let's go to my room and talk about it later. He handed me the room card. I held my breath, suffocated by the smell of alcohol, and pushed the room card back. Mr. Zhang, I'm just a participant in the project. You can talk to our leader. Unexpectedly, he became furious and suddenly pulled me up. A department manager, what are you so proud of? A woman being a manager, didn't you sleep your way up? You're trying to act like a virgin after being a whore? Do you think my position isn't high enough? You damn bitch, you actually dare to look down on me. The drunk was scarily strong. It took several male colleagues to pull him away. My heart was pounding, my wrist ached from being gripped so tightly, and I was almost too scared to move, leaning against the side. When the deputy director gave me a gesture, I realized what was happening and ran out the door. Looking down, the call hadn't been hung up. After I answered, Quinn didn't comfort me, he only said one sentence. Wait for me. The place I was on a business trip to wasn't far, but it was still a 3-hour drive. Quinn was always busy with work. The branch company had just gotten on the right track and couldn't be without him. I thought he would video call to comfort me or find someone to replace me. I went back to the hotel wanting to sleep, but I couldn't fall asleep no matter what I did. In the dark, I didn't turn on the lights, and I stared at the ceiling with my eyes open. Actually, it wasn't anything. I had long gotten used to these things. My family couldn't help me. I took out a student loan when I went to university, and I made money by working part-time jobs from dawn to dusk to pay for my living expenses. Back then, when the male boss harassed me, I could only endure it. Things were actually a lot better now, at least I could resist. Time passed little by little, and Quinn didn't message me again. I turned over and smiled bitterly. Even at this point, I still carried foolish expectations. Perhaps I always carried my mom's genes, which I hated, and shared her weakness. I had rarely seen my dad since I was born. All of humanity's shortcomings seemed to be embodied in him. He gambled, didn't come home, and kept finding women. When he did come home, it was to ask for money. Whenever my mom didn't give him money, he would hit my mom and me. Since I was old enough to understand things, I had been persuading my mom to get a divorce, and everyone around her was persuading her to get a divorce. But every time, she would sob and say that she wanted to give me a complete family, and she refused to divorce no matter what. At first, I didn't understand. Even though my dad treated us like this, how could she still think that a complete family would be better for me? Later, I realized that she didn't actually want a divorce, and she was just using me as an excuse. Every time my dad found a woman and she found out, she would cry and scream, taking a kitchen knife and a rope wanting to die together with my dad. But when my dad was really about to leave, she would chicken out, crying and kneeling on the ground holding my dad's legs begging him not to leave. In endless torment, this woman had become a Stockholm Syndrome patient. She hated my dad, but she couldn't leave my dad. I grew up like this, in endless daily pulling and tugging. Since I was little, I knew that men were unreliable, and you had to rely on yourself to get what you wanted. I wouldn't get back together with Lucas, because I knew that he couldn't change his nature. Even if he said the best things now, he wouldn't really settle down. And I wouldn't repeat my mom's tragedy. As for Quinn, did I really like him? Even I didn't know. Perhaps I just liked that he was well off and seemed to be a decent person. He was better than Lucas anyway. I pretended to be someone else to approach him, to attract him, but I knew that this kind of feeling was all fake. I was rarely so confused. Was this really what I wanted? The next second, the doorbell rang. I put on a coat and got out of bed to open the door. At the door, Quinn had changed into another suit, tailored and straight, not showing any signs of fatigue from driving through the night for several hours. I've already made it clear with that company and cancelled this cooperation. The person who cursed at you earlier has been fired. I guarantee that he won't be able to find a job in the industry again. You won't see him again. His expression was still calm, neither hugging me to comfort me nor saying anything nice. But just this person standing here seemed to represent a kind of reliability. Quinn looked at his watch. There are still 3 hours until dawn. Tomorrow's activities have been cancelled. You can sleep in. He paused and added, I'm staying next door to you. You can come find me anytime if you need anything. Saying that, he was about to leave, as if he had traveled all this way to be by my side just to say these few words. But my heart was strangely calmed down. The moment he turned around, I grabbed him, grabbed his collar, and stood on my tiptoes. A cool kiss intertwined with the faint scent of mint. I smiled at Quinn's astonished expression. Quinn, let's be together. 9. The feeling of being with Quinn was completely different from being with Lucas. He was a straight man who wasn't good at saying sweet words, but he showed his care in everything he did. When I encountered problems at work, his first reaction was never to comfort me, but to provide me with solutions. Often, the problems I told him about would disappear the next day. He wouldn't always say that he missed me, but even if I took the latest flight back at night, I would see him waiting at the airport. I experienced a kind of stable happiness that I had never felt before. But the happier I was, the more uneasy I felt. It was like standing on the edge of a cliff. It was clearly rock under my feet, but when I turned around, it became a bottomless abyss. I was starting to be afraid that Quinn would discover my true face, that every side of me that I presented to him was carefully disguised. I was afraid that he wouldn't like the real me. After a few snowfalls, the temperature dropped sharply. Adding the heavy thoughts and busy work, I finally fell ill. After asking the leader for leave, I stayed at home alone. I didn't live with Quinn. I was afraid that being too close to him would reveal the side of me that wasn't expected. When I was dazed with fever, I seemed to hear the doorbell ring. I thought I was dreaming, until the doorbell rang several times, and I barely opened my eyelids. When I staggered to open the door, I realized that it was Quinn outside. He held a thermos in his left hand and a bag of medicine in his right hand. It seemed to be snowing outside, and the black snow that hadn't melted remained on his wool coat. His long eyelashes intertwined together moistly with a slight blink. "I heard you were sick." He went to the dining table and put the lunchbox down. "You can't take medicine on an empty stomach. You should drink some porridge first." I didn't know what you liked to drink, so I bought one of each. Before I could react, he reached out and touched my forehead, then put his forehead against mine and frowned slightly. He sat on the sofa and began taking out each medicine. "What symptoms do you have now? Is it a cold or a viral flu?" "I got cold, it should be a cold, right?" Quinn took out a box of medicine, and carefully read the instructions. I stared blankly at him. I remembered the first time I saw him. He was like this, holding a report and frowning at it in a meeting. Back then, I was sitting farthest away from him. There were many people between us. He seemed so high above, so far away. So cold. But feelings based on pretense can't last long. What I like about you is that you're never willing to give up, no matter what difficulties you face. It's that you always have a clear plan for your life, that you know what you want and are never distracted by external things. I like you who has the same goals and values as me, not just you who likes the holy mountain, likes skiing in Hokkaido, and likes Leroy Musicny. I always feel that when two people are together, shared values are more important than similar interests. We're not just lovers, but also friends and comrades in arms who will go through life hand in hand. We have the same path to walk, instead of walking further and further apart and finally parting ways. He looked up, his light amber eyes looking at me seriously. "I like you a lot. I hope that we won't pretend in the future. I want to be with you forever." I was stunned. I wanted to say a lot of things, but when I opened my mouth, it turned into a blank. I had never been firmly chosen. My experiences growing up made me never hold any hope for relationships. So I habitually used methods and tricks to get feelings. I thought this was right, that there was no problem. There were so many people in this world who just got together and lived together. Real love only existed in novels and movies, like ghosts. Everyone said they existed, but no one had ever seen one. It was enough to find a man you liked and get together, who cares if he loved you or not. There was no such thing as love. I thought, there was no problem with me. Until someone tore through my pretense and told me that they liked the real me. He said I didn't need to pretend anymore, and said he hoped that we would be together forever. He was different from Lucas. Using those tricks on him that I used on Lucas was an insult to him. In an instant, the surging feelings turned into a huge blank space. I could have said a lot of things to make Quinn happy, but I could only nod blankly. "Okay, I promise you." Quinn smiled. He rarely smiled. It was like a cold pool breaking open deep ice, revealing a handful of spring water. "Then I forgive you." 12. I began to get along well with Quinn. I stopped trying to find out what he liked and gradually got to know him and learned to accommodate him. I no longer specially watched the movies he liked. After dinner at night, I snuggled with Quinn on the sofa to watch my favorite horror movies. He looked calm on the surface, but when he went to sleep at night, he had a nightmare for the first time and suddenly woke up. Then he hugged me for a long time without saying a word. Just when I was about to fall asleep, he said in a low voice, "Honey, can we not watch horror movies in the future?" I no longer drank red wine, and took him to small restaurants by the roadside to drink white wine. He wasn't very good at drinking, his face turned red, and he kept coughing. I made fun of him from the side. He got angry seriously too. Later, I found out that he secretly bought a lot of white wine at home and tried to practice his alcohol tolerance. Lucas went back and didn't bother me anymore. I heard that he suddenly wanted to go back to take over his family's business for some reason, and he was fighting with those illegitimate children to the death. In early March, Quinn proposed to me. He said he wanted to get married as soon as possible, and didn't want to wait any longer. I don't know how Lucas found out about the engagement, and he insisted on asking me to talk. After telling Quinn, I met Lucas halfway up the mountain. Below was the sea, the waves crashing against the rocks, and seagulls were circling in the sky. Lucas was leaning against the railing in a black sweatshirt. He handed me a can of beer, took a sip himself, glanced at the 8-carat diamond ring on my hand, and said sourly, "You're getting engaged after being together for such a short time." I held the beer and smiled. "When you're with the right person, you don't need to wait long." He scoffed, then fell silent, looking at the sea. After a long while, he opened his mouth. "Naomi, what about me? You just played with me like that, got tired of me and then threw me away. Now you're happy and fulfilled, what about me? There are so many girls who like you, what do you mean what about you? Are you afraid you can't find a girlfriend?" I jokingly patted him, and seeing that Lucas didn't smile, I withdrew my hand and said softly, "Lucas, you don't actually really like me either. If you really liked me, you wouldn't have always betrayed me when we were together. You're just never been dumped, and you can't accept that I'm the one who broke up first." Lucas didn't say anything, drinking the wine in his hand. I handed the beer back to him. "I wish you happiness in the future. This time I'm sincere." Then I turned and left. Having walked a long way, Lucas suddenly called me from behind, his voice trembling. "But Naomi, I really like you." I didn't stop, waved to him with my back turned, and continued walking. My phone rang, it was a message from Quinn. "I've already practiced my drinking. Tonight, let's decide the winner at the barbecue stand downstairs." I couldn't help but smile, and replied to him, "Okay, whoever gets drunk first is a dog." In the distance, the sky was high and the sea was wide, and sunlight streamed through the clouds. Spring had really arrived.